Welcome to the Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers of Washington and its monthly Artist Showcase. I'm your host, Mark Miller. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing a commensurate historical fiction author, David Martyn. I have known David for several years and have had success in selling his books at Barbecue to You. Welcome, David, to the Claw Hot Seat.
Glad to be here.
You have different subjects for your historical novels, and so I guess first question is, how did you happen on the first one regarding the lesser-known biblical figures?
Well, yeah, my first book is The Praise Singer, and it really started out as I had been writing at night when I was trouble sleeping psalms. And then I was just kind of intrigued with questions, and you know how your mind goes when you can't sleep. All kinds of odd, strange things come together, and two basic questions came together and resulted in the book Praise Singer. I call it The Praise Singer because it became a healthy place to include some of the psalms I had been writing. But the whole premise of the book is based upon I want an understanding of how God reveals himself, what he expects from us. You know, has it changed? What's it been? So, and I took as my lead for those who are familiar with the New Testament, where Paul wrote in Romans how everything we need to know about God has been revealed in Revelation, in creation. So I took from the point of view of someone who was totally isolated, and I created a character who was a slave with no genealogy, no name, and he was to a poor village in the mountains in Syria. And at any rate, and I added a second thought to that. But now I'm confusing myself. But the Praise Singer just follows this character, and he hears that through observation of creation that there must be a God. He just determines it, and he hears through other shepherds how God had spoken, and he runs off to find how the voice of God. And he's come alongside by Melchizedek, who kind of disciples him, who, that's the other, I lost my train of thought, excuse me, was Melchizedek. That's the other subtitle of the book, is A Disciple of Melchizedek, who disciples him and comes alongside him and answers his questions and challenges him and sends him back to be the priest of the people enslaved him. And it's a journey story. It's a journey of looking for God's revelation and understanding what God has really always wanted from us from the day of Adam all through his revelation. It's never changed. And that's the story.
And you write quite a few of your story involving what would be considered minor characters of the Bible.
Yes, yeah, I do. Well, you know, Melchizedek has always been not only a minor character, but extremely mysterious, and you know, but also I also have written short stories and a little short novel on Huldah, a prophetess. I've and I get into the story of Deborah in book 2, which in the Oak of Weeping, and because I wanted to write about the patriarchs, because to see if what has changed. So if book 1 was a kind of a thesis of what God expects us, and it's very simple. All God has ever expected us is two things: to love God and to love each other, to be His stewards and His creatures here on earth. And in the second story, I looked at that from the point of view of Deborah. Not Deborah the judge, but Deborah, who was the nursemaid to Rebecca when she went off to marry Isaac. And the Bible only mentions her twice. When she's with Deborah, she's her nurse, when Rebecca goes to marry Isaac, leaves her family in Haran, and travels south to Canaan at that time. And she's married. She's mentioned again only in the Bible mentions her as a second time only after 25 years after Rebekah dies. It says that Deborah died, and she was then serving in the household of Jacob, the son of Isaac and Rebekah. And it says that when she died, he mourned her, and he buried her at a place called Balan-Akuth. Well, you have to look up the word. Balan-Akuth is Hebrew for the oak of weeping. And it just, those little things get the mind going. Why did he weep? Why would he mourn? Why was she loved? And my little thesis is that she modeled love to Isaac and Rebekah through a troubled marriage. And I chose Isaac and Rebekah as the best example of the patriarchs because Isaac never had a second wife. He never took a concubine. He never remarried. He was faithful for his whole life, and he loved only one woman, and that was Rebekah. And I believe that's a model for us. So this story is their story. It's a love story.
Yeah. And to a certain extent, then, you're looking at the Old Testament a little more through that idea of loving God and loving each other, as opposed to what a lot of current people seem to do. They seem to concentrate on all of the, violence and wars and, the Exodus and all that stuff like that.
Yes, I write from the point of view that the biblical characters were real people. And what they struggled with is what we struggle with today. And it's just struggle with life. You struggle with a marriage where two sons who fought and hated each other, and mom and dad took different sides and different sons, and the pain to live through that, and the pain for Jacob to not only humiliate his older brother, but then get repaid through the misdeeds of Laban, and then for a guy who should have learned about love from his own parents, ends up falling in love with one girl and then marrying another woman, and then marrying the two maids of the women, and having 12 sons and a daughter by 4 different women, and very sinfully, prioritizing his wives. Even when he met his brother and was afraid of battle, he put his children and his wives in ascending order of importance. So there's lessons on that. So it's not about those things. But the question that I wanted to really get into, and I call this series, it's a 3-book series, 2 Old Testament, 1 to the Hall of Faith, because the really question is, if these men who are so many faults and so troubled were in the Hall of Faith, what was faithful about them? Why are they in the Hall of Faith? And that's the question. And it's not because they were supermen. It's not because they were great conquerors. No, it's because they basically learned the lesson that God gave before them to trust God. And that was the key thing I learned in this story, was not so much that the obedience to God, because Abraham was obedient from the very beginning, but he still was able to put his wife, to deny that his wife was his and allow her to be taken in the harem of another man, not once but twice. And so how could this be honorable? Well, it was a lifelong learning to that, not just to obey God, but to trust God. Yeah. And the trust is based on love.
And what has been kind of an overall response from the readership to these character studies that you're doing?
Well, the response has been very good. I mean, many people have been touched by the story because they don't. The Bible, in a lot of ways, is kind of like a Reader's Digest of people and God. So I just wanted to make their humanity known, for their stories to to speak to us, and that's been very, very good. Also, I've also heard from a lot of several people on Praise Singer when Melchizedek comes alongside of my character on the road from Damascus to Salem, before he knows he's talking to the king of Salem and a priest of the Most High God, how he opens up and his questions are answered, and the questions are a lot of questions that we never ask. What is atonement? Why is there sin? I mean, why is the blood sacrifice? Where did this come from? So there's a lot of those issues, and it's a journey. It's a journey on, and I kind of break. This book is very systematic in that it has a 4-step idea. First, learning to hear God's calling you, how He calls you. Second is learning how to love. The third was learning how to serve, and then the fourth step is living in a broken world.
Then you began a series on church history during an extended period of warfare in medieval Europe. So how did that come about?
Yeah. First of all, let's face it. Bible stories, Bible comment, has a very limited audience, and even for a lot of Christians, they go to church on Sunday. They've had their Bible lessons and their studies. They want to read other things.
Right.
So I wanted to write a different series, but also talk about a lot of the important things, themes, and the themes are universal. So I looked towards and I looked back in history, and I looked at the time when. I would say the perfect storm when politics, religion, corruption, greed led to the bloodiest war that Europe has ever seen. And maybe there's some lessons for there.
And that was the 30 Years' War.
And that was the 30 Years' War, right, from 1618 to 1648. And I look at from the perspective. I wanted to create it. I wanted to make it as a not just a history lesson, or did I want to make it into a sermon? No, I wanted to make it into, each one is a standalone mystery, but I wanted to put the reader into that time period and let them see for themselves the struggles that are not new, but are age old of living in tough times and choosing. Divided where there's divided loyalties, and most important of all is that distresses me as a Christian is how the church could possibly have been at war with itself, but it was.
Right.
And it was.
And the main character, is that based on an actual person?
No, the main character is imaginary, and I wanted characters on both sides because I don't want to find fault. I think, for instance. I was kind of inspired by Gettysburg, and if you saw that movie, if you read the book that it was based upon, if you were dropped down from outer space, you couldn't tell which side was right, which side was wrong. So when I address this topic of the 30 Years' War, I'm not looking for there was which side right and which side wrong. It was people. And there were people on both sides. So that's why I made my hero someone who was a man of faith, but a man who didn't fit in the world, finds himself, caught up in the war, finds himself of a victim of one of his own men shooting him from behind and leaving him for dead. And he's rescued by he's a failed Anglican priest, and he's rescued by a Roman Catholic priest, sheltering a Protestant woman in hiding in the forest outside Heidelberg. Oh. So that sets up the people, and of course it sets up the obvious thing. Two men, different sides, come together and find common ground.
What has helped you most in developing your characters and the storytelling?
Oh, I look for in the biblical characters, I just look at how I kind of how they come across to me. You know, if I were in that situation and I see how they struggle. For instance, when Abraham is called upon to sacrifice his son on the altar, Isaac. Okay, what did that take? And more so, how did Isaac, who was just a young boy, how did he feel when his father ties him to the altar and lifts a knife to take his life? And of course, that, you know, and there's tons, and if you read the Bible closely, there's tons of little hints. The fact that Isaac didn't take a wife until he was 40. The fact that Isaac never made an altar. The fact that Isaac was troubled and tried to have a relationship with his brother after he was expelled from the family. So I look at that. So I just try to put myself, and I use the term of the reasonable man. I don't know, maybe it's something I learned from, law. What would the reasonable man who is well-intentioned, how would he react? And that's how my hero, I name him Robert Curtis, he's not a Superman. He's not a genius.
Yeah.
He's not even sure of himself. But he has a basic faith and a basic trust and a basic understanding and a willingness to learn, and so an openness. Yeah. So that's how I approach it. And of course, there are different types of people. You know, I paint the tyrants for what they were, and history makes that pretty easy when you talk, whether it's King James or Charles or Richelieu or Louis in France. Those historical figures are pretty easy to capture.
Since your stories span quite a few years and sometimes complete time periods, do you have any insight for an author out there how you keep all your notes and times and everything organized?
Yeah, well, you know, obviously this series is chronological, so each story is a standalone mystery. But the characters go on, and there's a different theme. You know, obviously the theme of the first book is the reconciliation, because I have a Catholic priest, and I have a Protestant family, and I have all these people, and they're trying to, and I try to portray the best as well as the worst on all sides. But following on, since I chose an Englishman. Specifically because they were kind of in and out, and there were other things. The English Reformation was going on, and hopefully they were learning from what was happening in Europe. So in the second book, obviously, I develop. You know, this book is a close relationship between the priests and the father of one of the girl who was being saved and trying to save her brother.
Yeah.
In the second, I developed a relationship with a former sergeant, a soldier who had worked and had absolutely no respect. He was a neighbor, grew up from the same town, and they were right on the border between England and Scotland. And the growing relationship between them, and I look at different issues. And in the third book, I look at it. So if this is religious, and this is more of a political, looking at the political issues. In the third book, it gets very personal, where my hero is now married, and his wife gets drawn into the intrigue, and she's implicated in a plot. So it's the tension of a husband afraid of, is he losing a wife that he loves dearly? Yeah. And oh, by the way, is she also guilty of
some type of treason or something?
Treason.
Yeah. So how do you approach writing? Do you usually write daily, or a specific time you write, or things like that?
You know, I think about my writing daily. It never stops thinking. I try to write daily. If I can't write, I do research, and tons of research, notes, backgrounds. I try to in my stories, if I can find a real name, I use a real name, a real place, a real inn, a real church. Everything and if I use a real name or a real person, I do as much research as I can to find out, to make sure that they fit the plot that I'm trying to put them in. And so chronologies are important. Yep. Yes, you have to. I don't do a storyboard, but I do keep copious notes, and timelines are important. I am not much of a. I started writing by trying to outline my books in
Right.
advance, but I found that unsatisfactory because the stories take their own life
Exactly.
in the outline. So instead what I do is I have a general idea, a beginning, and where I want to take it, and I'll outline maybe 5, 6, 7 chapters in advance, and then modify.
And
as I go.
how do you currently publish your books? And
Yeah, I'm published by just an absolutely wonderful local publisher here in Port Orchard, Blue Forge Press, who has been extremely supportive and helpful. And I would strongly recommend finding a publisher you trust. And what I value about Blue Forge is they are, as a nonprofit, they're dedicated to preserving the author's intent. They're important on making sure that the book is readable and making sure that it's clean, but they're not going to question the artistic and creative intent of the author.
and they help you promote your books.
Yes, to an extent they help. Promotion of books is a difficult thing, and for that, I look to Claw, and I'm also a member at Greater Gig Harbor Literary Society, and of course I depend also upon my network and on a critique group of fellow writers. Writing is a shared activity. There's the old saying of iron sharpens iron. Well,
Right.
Writers help each other, even in all kinds of unexpected ways. And one of the writers C.S. Lewis, who I love the most, was a famous member of the Inklings with Tolstoy and several others. So I'm sure they all benefited from each other's help.
And how would somebody contact you, maybe a starting writer would want to contact you about
Yeah,
something?
I have a website. It's davidjmartyn.com, and or email, or through Blue Forge, or through Claw. And as I say, writers help each other in many ways. And in fact, I would encourage if you're writing and you're alone, you're losing out on a lot of the benefits that comes from not only the fellowship, but the help and the encouragement of other writers. But also, it's amazing when we go to events, the book signings with other writers. It's the exchange between writers that even if it's a slow day and there's few book sales, just the time and camaraderie of spending time and talking not only to the public but the other writers is extremely helpful. All kinds of you'll never know where the little push, the little idea will come that has a tremendous impact on your work.
Well, thanks for coming here again, David.
All right, thank you.
And as one of the, shall we say, stronger members of Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers. And of course, Claw has been interviewing and filming various creatives in conjunction with Bremerton Kitsap Access Television for several years now. And I want to thank all of our viewers for turning into Bremerton Kitsap Access Television and viewing this Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers production. I also wish to thank, once again, of course, the BCAT staff. They have worked tirelessly to make the broadcast a success. This broadcast interview is scheduled for later this next month, in probably February, March timeframe. We broadcast 6 p.m. every Saturday on Channel 3 on a Soundwave cable and Channel 12 on Comcast. Keep in touch with our Facebook pages for updates on what creative we will be interviewing in the future, and events and authors and artisans will attend in the community. And of course, look for us at the yearly Blackberry Festival and the Kitsap County Fair and Stampede. We at Claw have a mission statement to help authors and artists become known to the public and expose their artistic endeavors to the residents of Kitsap County and the world. Thus, we plan to continue this endeavor as long as the BCAT staff and the viewing public support us. We charge no dues. The only expense involves various venue fees. CLAW exists for the artists and authors to help with marketing, distribution, and publicity. We meet every month on the first and third Wednesdays at Spiro's Pizza on Kitsap Way in Bremerton, Washington, usually by 7 p.m. Also, for filmmakers and actors, we have a related group, Kitsap Peninsula Filmmakers, which meets on the second Tuesday of every month at the Family Pancake House on Wheaton Way in Bremerton, also at 7 p.m. Everyone is welcome. We are not the only group out there. There are many other independent writers and critique groups in Western Washington. And of course, as David mentioned, the Blue Forge Group and Blue Forge Press, a 503c3 nonprofit, helps filmmakers publishing comics, music, artwork. It strongly supports the arts in Kitsap County. Kitsap, the subsidiary of Blue Forge, also helps by ensuring that these interview shows are also on YouTube. I hope everyone has a pleasant day and a productive and fascinating year. Until next time, I'm Mark Miller with Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers. Good day.